Morning to fully clear, but dry and sunny conditions will follow from the north. Breezy around coastal areas with an isolated shower possible across North Wales. Otherwise, it will be dry with plenty of sunshine for all. A rather breezy day, especially towards the northwest, where the odd isolated shower is possible during the morning. Otherwise, it will be dry with plenty of prolonged sunny spells for all. It will be a dry day, but also rather breezy, especially over the hills and coasts, and there will be some patchy cloud, but also plenty of prolonged sunny spells throughout the rest of the day. Rather windy, especially in the west, where local gales are possible at first. Scattered showers are also likely in the west, drier in the east with sunny spells for all. Windy with coastal gales possible at first. Showers are likely in the north, but drier elsewhere. Some cloud at times, but plenty of sunny spells are expected throughout the day. So showers and winds will ease in the northwest, but elsewhere remaining dry with sunny or clear spells into the evening. And that's how the weather is shaping up for your Monday.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christie's. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Good morning, this is To The Point on GB News with myself, Mercy Moroki. I'm on your TV, radio and online, and I'm with you until midday with today's biggest stories, lots of discussion with expert guests and your opinions as well. We'll be talking Scottish independence, potential energy blackouts, immigration and much more as well. So make sure you get in touch with your views as usual. gbviews@gbnews.uk is the email you need. We'll get to that in just a moment, but first, here's your latest headlines.
A very good morning. Just 1 minute past 10. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date today on GB News. There's been a significant escalation of Russian shelling across Ukraine this morning. Just bear with me. Casualties are being reported across the country following explosions in several cities, including the capital. Well, the President, Volodymyr Zelensky, says 11 important infrastructure facilities in 8 regions in Kyiv have been damaged in missile strikes. The attacks are the most intense to hit the capital since the start of the war. Blasts were also reported in Lviv and Ternopil in the west, as well as Dnipro in central Ukraine. The Ukrainian Defence Ministry has vowed revenge.
They want panic and chaos. They want to destroy our energy system. They are hopeless. The second target is people. Such as time, such goals were specifically chosen to cause as much damage as possible. But we are Ukrainians. We help each other. We believe in ourselves. we restore everything that is destroyed.
Well, the strikes come after President Vladimir Putin accused Ukraine of a targeted attack at the weekend, a truck explosion damaging a bridge that links Russia to Crimea. He's described the incident as an act of terror. Speaking at a rally in Arizona, the former US President Donald Trump warned World War III could happen unless measures are taken to end the conflict.
We must demand immediate negotiation of a peaceful end to the war in Ukraine, or we will end up in World War III, and there will never be a war like this. We will never have had a war like this, and that's all because of stupid people that don't have a clue, and it's also because of the kind of weaponry that's available today.
The Prime Minister is going to urge MPs to work together as a united party as Parliament resumes this week. Liz Truss has now appointed Greg Hands as the International Trade Minister. It's a move that's being seen as an attempt to ease party tensions. Hands supported Rishi Sunak during the leadership contest. He replaces Conor Burns, who was sacked from his role on Friday following a misconduct complaint. The Work and Pensions Minister, Victoria Prentice, told GB News the government's priority is getting new legislation through Parliament.
I think this is now a time for getting on with some really serious, detailed policy work and getting some legislation through Parliament. What's important to us, really, is that we provide that careful, sensible, calm government which the public need and deserve. I don't think people are interested in the interior workings of the Conservative Party.
Scotland's First Minister is expected to tell SNP delegates that independence will lead to a better relationship between the UK's four nations. Nicola Sturgeon, who's due to close the party conference in Aberdeen this afternoon, is also going to accuse the UK government of denying Scottish democracy. The Supreme Court will rule if a prospective bill to hold another vote is within the powers of Holyrood later this week. Criminal barristers in England and Wales have voted to end their strike action after accepting a pay offer from the government. The offer from the Ministry of Justice includes reforms to set fees for legal aid work and an investment of £54 million in the criminal bar. Almost 57% of the bar voted to accept the deal. The strike action will end at 6 tonight. Well, the chairman of the Criminal Bar Association, Kirsty Brimlow, told GB News there's still a lot of anger, though, amongst members.
The offer really did hit the demands of the criminal bar. However, a number of barristers still consider that it hasn't gone far enough. There's still a lot of trust in government that has to be realised, and we hope that this is the start of a constructive arrangement.
ScotRail's warning passengers of widespread travel disruption across the network today as strikes continue. It's members of the RMT who are staging a 24-hour walkout over an ongoing dispute on pay. There will only be a limited number of ScotRail services operating today, and passengers have been urged to only travel if they really need to. The number of people crossing the Channel in a single day has topped 1,000 for the fourth time in under 2 months. Ministry of Defence figures show that 1,065 people made the journey from France to the UK yesterday in 25 small boats. The latest crossings bring the total number to over 34,700 people this year. You're up to date on GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's head back to Mercy and to the point.
Well, good morning. This is To The Point on GB News with myself, Mercy Moroki, on your TV, radio and online. Here's what's coming up today. Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, claims an independence vote could take place next October, insisting her plans are ready to go. Well, how realistic is this? And as for the Tories, what do they need to do to regain popularity as polls continue to show huge slumps? I'll look at all that in just a moment. And are we in for energy blackouts this winter, as some have suggested? Well, Cabinet Minister, Office Minister Nadhim Zahawi suggests it will be, quote, unlikely, but hasn't ruled anything out. I'll speak with an energy expert from Imperial College London to discuss how seriously we should take blackout warnings. And protests in Iran enter their 24th day of unrest with no sign of slowing down and dozens of people dead. What do these freedom protests mean for the Iranian regime, and what role could the West play? We'll look into that a bit later. That's all coming up across the programme. I am here until midday, as usual. And remember, you can get in touch with me to tell me your views, because I'll be reading those out as well. gbviews@gbnews.uk is the email you need. Prime Minister Liz Truss is reportedly set to begin a charm offensive to try and reunite her party and reinvigorate her premiership. This comes as another big U-turn is reportedly on the cards, with several Tory MPs warning the government they would lose a vote on a real terms cut to benefits. Truss also appointed Greg Hands, a former backer of her rival for the Tory leadership Rishi Sunak, to minister at the Department for International Trade. This followed the sacking of Conor Burns, who was suspended after eyewitnesses claimed he touched a young man's thigh at a hotel bar. So, after all this, what of the party's electoral fortunes? Well, joining me to discuss that further is Joe Twyman, who's co-founder and director of polling company Delta Poll. Good morning, Joe. I just want to first refer to a poll you have done at Delta Poll. It's voting intention, which shows the Labour Party 25 points ahead with 51%. I just wondered, in terms of seats, how that translates into seats. Would that be a huge majority, we're talking, for the Labour Party, if an election was held tomorrow, of course?
Yes, if there were a general election tomorrow, it points to a strong majority for Labour, even without the Scottish seats, many of which would be taken up by we assume by the SNP. But of course, the important thing to remember is that, as many of your viewers, I'm sure, will be saying at the screen now, there isn't a general election tomorrow. And though polls are a good snapshot of public opinion at the current moment, they don't necessarily provide much in the way of indications of where we will be over the coming weeks and months. And I think it's that Liz Truss is hoping she can turn around with her, if you like, reset today.
And how volatile is public opinion? Because can it change sort of on a dime? Is there things that Liz Truss can honestly do at this point that can change the party's electoral fortunes at this point? Because 25 points and bigger in some polls is a huge lead for the Labour Party.
Yes, that's right. At Delta Poll, our lead of 25 points is actually at the lower end of some of the polling that's been conducted. It has been as high as 33, and even in most recent polls, it's up to 30. And it is true that polling does fluctuate. All polls are subject to a margin of error. That's to do with the laws of probability, and we can't abolish that in the same way we can't abolish the laws of gravity. So there are fluctuations along the way. And indeed, as recently as a few years ago, the Conservatives had more than 20-point lead, but that was during the pandemic. What we're interested in when looking at polling is the long-term trends, however. And the trend over recent months has not been good for the Conservatives. Conservatives haven't been ahead in a published poll for the entire year. You have to go back to December 2021 for the last time that happened. And over the summer, Labour enjoyed leads of between 10 and 15%. But since then, the trend has been one of acceleration towards Labour, and they've really benefited from a combination of events, including a positive party conference for them, a bad party conference for the Conservatives, and of course, the reaction and fallout from the markets and from the commentariat around the mini budget. It's all been, if you like, a perfect storm for the Conservatives, which has led them to this position now. The question is, looking forward, how will the party perform over the next few weeks and months? Because, as you say, there's relatively little that Liz Truss actually has available to her in terms of levers to move public opinion. And potentially with the cost of energy rising, with a difficult winter ahead for the NHS, as it always is, but this could be particularly true this year, and even the risk, however small, of blackouts could mean that the government actually is in one of its strongest positions at the moment, and things may get even worse.
And let's talk about Scotland and Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP's prospects. They're having their conference, and today is the last day. She's expected to make that big final speech, and she very much will be, as expected, rallying for another referendum, although the Supreme Courts are going to have to look at the constitutionality of that. Where are we now, as it stands, in terms of support for a second referendum?
Well, what we've seen is that the SNP is around about sort of 40 to 45% in the polls, depending on which you look at, and it's been pretty consistent on that. But the big increase has been with the Labour Party, who have really benefited from the collapse of the Conservatives since going all the way back to Ruth Davidson leaving the leadership there, but also more recently with Liz Truss becoming Prime Minister. So Labour in a strong second. And what we've also seen consistently is support for remaining as part of the United Kingdom. This is something that has been seen time and again in polls. And so it's one thing for Nicola Sturgeon to say that she is looking for support for a referendum, but something quite different for her actually then to win that were it to occur.
Mm. Yeah, and obviously the SNP do have, a huge number of seats relative to their opponents. They have something like twice the number the Conservatives do in the Scottish Parliament. Lots of people say, look, she has a mandate insofar as the SNP are the largest party by far, and lots of people will see that Liz Truss is trying to obstruct Nicola Sturgeon and the Scottish National Party. Can you see the argument for that? Is that reflected in sort of the research you do when you're exploring people's opinions on nationalism?
Well, what we're seeing is that the SNP remain very popular among people who wish to leave the United Kingdom, and they've consistently performed well in mopping up those voters. But at the moment, they don't have, at least in the polling, a majority of the support. And certainly, the polling around that specific question on the referendum suggests that if there were a referendum in recent times or coming up very soon, then they would not win. And you could argue, I guess, that it's convenient for the Scottish nationalists to talk about wanting a referendum only for then to be denied them. That feeds into their narrative of Westminster denying their democratic rights. But actually, the reality is they probably wouldn't win as things stand at the moment.
Mm. That's interesting. Well, Joe Twyman, thank you so much for joining me to discuss all things polling this morning, co-founder and director of Delta Poll there. Well, today is the final day, as I said there, of the Scottish National Party conference. And as we've been speaking about, Scottish First Minister Nicola Sturgeon is set to reiterate her desire to push through a Scottish independence referendum. She made headlines, however, over the weekend, saying that she detested the Tories and everything they stood for. Well, for the latest, we can go to our political editor, Darren McCaffrey. Before we get into that, Darren, I believe you have some breaking news for us about the Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng.
Yeah, indeed, Mercy. You may remember over the last, week or so, there's been a big row about when this medium-term fiscal plan, rather boring word, for essentially the government setting out the big long-term plan for the economy, or the medium-term plan for the economy. And now, it was due to be held on November 23rd, and that is what the Chancellor told Liam Halligan, our economics editor, last week. It's what the Prime Minister told me last week as well, even though there had been suggestions it would be brought forward, not least of all because many MPs, many people in the city following that turmoil and the mini-budget wanted it to be brought forward because also it will spark the release of the OBR forecasts for the British economy. That's the Office for Budget Responsibility, the kind of independent body that scrutinises what the government does. Now, in the last couple of minutes, the Chancellor has conceded ground on all of this. I'm sure some will present it yet again as another U-turn from the government, and it is going to be brought forward now, Mercy, to the end of this month, to Halloween, October 31st. So we will get the medium fiscal kind of plan from the government and those OBO forecasts a bit earlier, about 3 or 4 weeks earlier than we had expected at the end of this month. Quite crucial, actually, not least of all because that will come ahead of another decision by the Bank of England with the interest rates at the start of November.
Well, thank you for that update, Darren. You're obviously in Aberdeen. You've been following the Scottish National Party conference. Just tell us what the takeaways have been so far and what we can expect from Nicola Sturgeon when she speaks a bit later.
Really fascinating, actually, having come from, obviously, the Labour Party conference and the Conservative Party conference in Liverpool and Birmingham, which were dominated by the cost of living crisis, energy security, and for the Conservatives, lots of internal wrangling. Here in Aberdeen, perhaps unsurprisingly, it has been dominated by Scotland's place inside the United Kingdom, Scottish independence, if you like. Now, Nicola Sturgeon, actually, in many ways, hasn't got anything really new to say about that. She's already set out a strategy to a large degree, not least of all because she is saying that she wants to have a referendum in October next year. She's consulting the Supreme Court, who actually start the proceedings tomorrow, about who ultimately has the say on a referendum, to hold one or not. Is it MSPs in Holyrood or is it MPs in Westminster? Now, the expectation is that the Supreme Court, who will take a couple of months to deliver their judgment, will back Westminster's kind of supremacy in all of this. And of course, the British government, Liz Truss, has made it clear there is not going to be a referendum anytime soon. So what then does Nicola Sturgeon do? Well, over the summer, she's hinted at suggesting that the 2024 general election could be held as a de facto referendum. Though how that constitutionally works is slightly beyond me, and in fact, I think almost everyone else. So in some ways, the SNP are slightly blocked in by all of this. But Nicola Sturgeon will say in her speech later on today that she is not going to give up on the desire for an independent Scotland. But while all this is happening, many people outside the conference centre, many people elsewhere in the country, simply feels actually the Scottish Government should be focusing on the everyday issues of the cost of living crisis, standards in schools, the health service this winter, energy security. The SNP's tenure and their achievements in government are pretty mixed, and there is, I think, an element of frustration that yet again independence and the big constitutional question are continuing to dominate politics here. It is very divisive. Opinion polls show there are about a 50-50 split. They've not really changed, actually, in recent years. I think one of the more interesting polls is, though, that only a third of Scots feel that now is the time for another referendum. And that's the problem for the SNP. How do they get there? And how also do they keep the members and the supporters motivated when there's no obvious route to that second referendum?
Well, that will catch up with you a bit later. Aaron Paffy there, our political editor. Let us know how you feel that Nicola Sturgeon said she detests the Tories, didn't she? And then she later said, well, I didn't really mean the people, I mean the policies and values. But she didn't apologise, I don't think. I think she said she didn't regret it. So let me know how you feel about that. GBViews at gbnews.uk. But after the break, could winter blackouts happen this year? While the government sought to reassure the public that it's extremely unlikely, but hasn't ruled anything out. We'll be discussing that in more detail. But first, here's your weather.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. It's a fine day for most of us, sunny skies for many, especially for England and Wales, but it will be windy for Scotland in particular, with quite frequent showers here. That's where an area of low pressure resides, just to the north of Scotland. Tight isobars there, bringing some strong winds, especially into the far north. But a cold front that has brought some rain earlier in the day, well, that's now clearing, and the last of the cloud clears away from Kent as we head into the afternoon as well. So brighter skies there for much of England and Wales. The odd shower for northwest England, perhaps North Wales as well. But the lion's share of showers will be across northern and western Scotland, a few for the north and Northern Ireland as well. Cloudier skies here, and that brisk breeze making it feel cool. 11 to 13 Celsius for Scotland and Northern Ireland, but 14 to 17 for England and Wales, where we see those bright blue skies. Heading into the evening, and with light winds and clear skies for much of England, Wales, southern and eastern Scotland, well, we'll see temperatures fall away. The odd mist patch form, but for most it's a clear night. Cloudier conditions for the north and west of Scotland as well as Northern Ireland, and showers continuing here, although fewer compared with the daytime. So 7 or 8 Celsius in the northwest, whilst low single figures are possible across sheltered parts of England and Wales, even a touch of air frost in 1 or 2 spots. So cold start to the day for England, Wales, perhaps parts of eastern Scotland, but bright skies. Into the afternoon, I think the cloud will build for Scotland and for northern parts of Northern Ireland, with some outbreaks of rain arriving, 13 or 14 Celsius here, but we keep these sunny spells further south, 15 to 16 degrees, a degree or so cooler compared with Monday, but with light winds and those sunny skies, I think feeling pleasant enough. Into the evening, and the outbreaks of rain start to turn heavier and more persistent for Northern Ireland, Western Scotland, and that rain spreads across the country during Wednesday. A wet and windy day for many on Thursday, showers on Friday.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christie. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Good morning. The time's 10:24 and this is To The Point with me, Mercy Moroki, on GB News. I'm live on your TV, online and radio this morning. Well, we have just heard that Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng will bring forward his medium-term fiscal plan to October the 31st in the wake of market turmoil. And yesterday, Cabinet Office Minister Nadhim Zahawi sought to reassure the public that winter blackouts were, quote, extremely unlikely, but that it was important that the government plans for every scenario. Well, this all follows the National Grid saying consumers could face power outages to ensure that the grid does not collapse in the unlikely event gas supplies fall short of demand. Well, let's speak to Malcolm Grimston, who's Senior Research Fellow at the Centre for Energy Policy and Technology at Imperial College. Always good to speak to you, Malcolm. Let's firstly start off with what Nadhim Zahawi said yesterday. He was seeking to reassure the public that blackouts would be unlikely, although he said the government have to plan for every scenario. Is he right that they are very unlikely?
Yes, that's right. So every year the National Grid does these exercises. It looks at possible things that could lead to power cuts and how those power cuts would be managed. So there's nothing particular about that. I think it is fair to say that we are closer to major blackouts this year than we have been for some considerable time. And how could we be otherwise? We've had massive disruption to Europe's gas supplies. We've had a very dry spell, which has meant that hydropower across Europe isn't very available. We've had a spell with relatively little wind, and we've had the world coming out of the post-COVID recession using more energy. So it's quite right that we look at these possibilities, but it still remains far more likely than not that we'll be okay this winter.
And is part of the country being okay, does that partly depend on people using their energy more sparingly, or whatever the word I'm looking for is? Because the government have said they won't be going ahead with this campaign, a £14 million campaign to give the public information on how to save energy. What did you make of that?
I think it was unfortunate. It's certainly the case with the prices that we're having to pay of energy now. But I think all of us are taking use of energy far more seriously. I certainly am. And we're looking at ways to reduce our bills at home. But there are certain things that I think it would be helpful for government to telling people about. Ironically, one of them is this very misleading statement that energy bills will be capped at £2,500. They won't. That's the average price that a household will pay based on the cap. But of course, many households will be paying a lot more than that. And we kind of need a bit of public information to get over the misinformation that the government has accidentally put out over this. But there's lots of other things. I think it would be helpful just to have a list of people saying these are the things that use a lot of energy in the home, and these are the things that don't use quite so much. So the kettle, the washing machine, they do use a lot of energy. The television, the radio, not so much. So if you're planning your day, if you can plan the day round doing low energy activities when demand is generally high, which is during the daytime and the early evening, and then do low energy activities overnight when there's much less demand for electricity. All those sorts of things seem to me to be very sensible. And given the sums we're talking about, £40 million, it really is a drop in the ocean when the government is talking about £40 billion in the next 6 months to help us with our energy bills. So I personally think that's an unfortunate decision, and I hope the government will rethink it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more there. The amount of times I've heard people say energy bills are capped at 2,500, and I'm just thinking, no, they're absolutely not capped at that. That's just the average price the average household can expect to pay on average. So I couldn't agree with you more there. And what about how much of this is still dependent on where we go with the Russian invasion of Ukraine? Because there are news stories coming out every single day that Russia is still very much on the attack, and we have now implemented across Europe lots of sanctions on Russian energy. Does the fact this is still going on worry you slightly in terms of where this could lead for British energy security?
Of course it does. I mean, we should remember that the energy crisis was brewing before the Russian invasion. I was chatting to you and your colleagues for several weeks before that invasion, because there were already many factors that were pushing energy prices up, not particularly to the extent of us being afraid of security of supply, I think. But of course, the big extra player that is the Russian invasion, and what we're seeing in terms of damage to the pipelines from Russia into Germany, carrying gas, for example. This is extremely worrying, and it does emphasize that energy is a very volatile business. You can get massive changes happening in very short periods of time, as we've seen over the last year or two. But to put those things right takes a very long period of time. It takes a lot of investment to produce a new gas rig, as we're looking at the moment, or a new nuclear power station, or a new tidal barrier, or whatever, or to strengthen the grid so it can take offshore wind, let's say. So we do need to recognise that there's a long-term issue here as well as the short-term one.
Yeah, and I don't know if you heard there just before the break, we were speaking, getting the breaking news that Chancellor Kwesi Kwarteng will be bringing forward his medium-term fiscal plan to October the 31st, so just 3 more weeks or so to wait for that. What would you like to hear from his fiscal plan?
Well, I think we've already got the bones of it there, which is major increased investment in nuclear power, looking again at North Sea gas to make us a bit less dependent on imported gas. Clearly, the wind doesn't blow all the time, and we need to use gas to fill in those gaps. And I think we'll also see a clarification as to the short-term help for people who are having huge problems with their energy bills. So I think we've already got a reasonable shape of what the Chancellor is likely to do. And it's an enormous challenge for this government. It's, in a sense, been extremely unlucky to the new Chancellor has inherited a very, very difficult situation. And he will need to be working with colleagues in trade and industry departments and other departments to see how we can get this twin problem of getting through the next perhaps year or two. Energy prices will come down. In fact, the gas price has come down quite noticeably over recent weeks, although we need to see what effect the latest developments have. And petrol prices at the pump, we've all seen have come down quite away from their peak. So there is some sort of good news there, but we can't continue making this mistake of a short-term crisis, a short-term solution, and not looking at the long-term to prevent the next crisis happening. And that's what I hope we will see from the Chancellor's statement.
Sure. Well, Malcolm, thank you so much for joining me, a senior research fellow there at the Centre for Energy Policy and Technology at Imperial College. Now, I'm just going to read one of your views, which I really like. This is from Shirley. She says, many of us remember 15% interest rates, 3-day week, oil crisis, gazumping. We were in our mid-20s. We never looked to the state. Our parents advised and guided us. We were encouraged to save, buy what you can afford, and we encouraged our children to save and appreciate the upside of not being in debt. Making the point, that's a really good point, Shirley, making the point there that maybe perhaps now we've kind of become soft. We think we're in a bad position, but we have what's the word? I can't remember. But we're not appreciating the fact that people before us had it much worse. Because at the moment, yes, interest rates are going up to 6% or so, but 15%, Shirley's saying that she was paying. So definitely not as bad as it could be. I think it's a good takeaway there from Shirley's message. Keep getting in touch. gbviews@gbnews.uk is the email. After the break, as protests and tensions in Iran enter their 24th day of unrest, is there a real risk to Iran's regime? Well, we'll be speaking to an expert after a look at this morning's headlines.
A very good morning. It's 10:33. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date today on GB News. Some breaking news in the last half an hour. The Chancellor has brought forward his medium-term fiscal plan. In a letter to the chairman of the Commons Treasury Committee, Kwasi Kwarteng said it will now be published on October the 31st. Well, last week in an exclusive interview with GB News, the Chancellor said he was going to deliver his plan at the end of November, despite speculation suggesting otherwise.
You are going to bring forward the fiscal assessment in conjunction with the Office of Budget Responsibility. You said in your speech yesterday that will happen shortly. Is shortly before the 23rd?
So shortly is the 23rd. I mean, people reading the runes and parsing.
So it is going to be the 23rd of November. You're not bringing that fiscal plan forward?
It's going to be the 23rd of November. Okay.
There's been a significant escalation of Russian shelling across Ukraine this morning, with casualties being reported across the country, including the capital. The President Volodymyr Zelensky says 11 important infrastructure facilities in Kyiv and 8 regions have been damaged. The British Foreign Secretary James Cleverly says firing missiles into civilian areas is unacceptable, and the attack is a demonstration of Putin's weakness, not strength. Criminal barristers in England and Wales have voted to end strike action after accepting a pay offer from the government. The offer from the Ministry of Justice includes reforms to set fees for legal aid work and an investment of £54 million in the criminal bar. Almost 57% of the bar voted to accept the deal. The strike action will end at 6 p.m. tonight. We're on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christie. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Good morning, it's 10:37 and this is To The Point with me, Mercy Moroki, and I'm live on your TV, online and radio this morning. Now, anti-government protests in Iran have entered their 24th day and show no sign of stopping. The National Council of Resistance of Iran, which is an opposition group, claim protests have taken place in over 177 cities and that there have been over 400 casualties. Over the weekend, Iranian state TV was hacked by an anti-regime activists broadcasting message against the supreme leader Ali Khamenei. Now, the unrest was triggered by the death of Mahsa Amini, a 22-year-old woman who died after being detained by morality police for allegedly breaking the strict law requiring women to cover their hair with a hijab or headscarf. Well, is the Iranian regime threatened by these protests? And could we see real reforms within Iran as a result of all of this? Well, joining me now to discuss this in more detail is Catherine Perez-Shakdam, who's a research fellow at the Henry Jackson Society, which is a foreign policy and a security think tank. Thanks for speaking with me. I think we spoke about a couple of weeks ago. Did you expect that the protests at this point would still be going on?
No. The reason being, such protests have happened in the past and, they usually followed by a very heavy crackdown from the regime and people tend to retreat. But I think this time it's very different. The nature of the protest, the calls for regime change are not call for reforms anymore. And I think this is what is different about this movement. And I think it's about time we start calling it a revolution. When you see just how much it cuts across, ethnic lines, religious line, the fact that it's not about the economy, it's not about, again, call for reforms. It's about regime change, democracy. People want their freedom. And we're talking basic human rights here. Yeah. The ability to formulate a thought, the ability for women to have free movement, and again, to choose the fashion of their clothing, which is very basic. And something that the regime is preventing them from exceeding.
So can you explain that? Because as I mentioned there, Mahsa Amini did die. She was in police custody. She was reported for allegedly, showing her hair when she wasn't supposed to. The morality police arrested her. This will be alien to so many people. They'll be saying, wait, how can something which seems so innocuous, so innocent, be causing all these deaths, be causing all these protests? Can you just explain to us the symbolic significance of something like the headscarf and why the morality police are so intent on policing it?
Right. Well, under Islamic law, a woman is actually mandated to cover her hair, but it's something that is meant to be a very personal choice, a religious choice. Most women across the Middle East choose not to, some choose to. So there's variance of what a headscarf means. Now, when the Islamic Revolution happened in 1979, Ayatollah Khomeini, very early on, it was in 1981, wanted to ensure that women would follow his strict abidance to Islamic law. And that meant not just a headscarf, but the chador. So it means that you cannot even show one strand of hair. It would be an offense to God. And potentially, you could potentially be accused of waging a war against God, which is the death penalty. But if not, just for showing hair, you could receive corporal punishment, 72 lashes, imprisonment, fines. It all depends on the morality police decision. And this is something which over the years has been more or less enforced due to protests and people wanting to have a bit more freedom. But under President Raisi, he decided to abide by the law very strictly. And that meant that women like Mahsa Amini, were approached by police, were severely beaten up, and she died, unfortunately. She's not the only one to have died. But I think it was such a flashpoint moment for Iranian society that they just realized that this regime wasn't going to listen to them, wasn't going to give them the reform that they want. And I think that what you see in the street is, a generational gap in terms of the protests are being led by what they call the Zoomers in Iran, which is basically between 19 and 25 years old, who do not abide by, those Islamic traditions that maybe their parents or grandparents, held. And they are aware of the world's social media.
They want their freedoms that they see
do.
lots of people
They do.
enjoying. And just very finally, what, if any, is the role of the West in all of this? Because on one hand, I can understand people no longer having an appetite to, getting involved in the affairs of foreign nations. That hasn't necessarily worked very well in the past and has led to more bloodshed. But on the other hand, shouldn't we, as the West, be supporting people when they are fighting for these basic freedoms?
That's a very good question, actually. Yes. I mean, when we talk about regime change or supporting a revolution, people tend to be a bit wary. It hasn't worked out in the past. Now, what Iranians are asking for is not regime change by means of us doing it for them. It's really just, international support, a recognition that the movement is actually a legitimate popular movement against the Islamic regime. And I think there's a great deal we could do. We could start putting a pin in the JCPOA, for example, and understand that us negotiating with the regime, which is willing to kill its own people, including children, in the streets, on live television, without so much of a remorse. We need to ask ourselves, do we want to deal with those, this regime, those government officials, when they have lost all legitimacy? The answer should be no. We should also abide by our own rules and remember that we did sign the Declaration of Human Rights. And so that means that we have to speak up when human rights are violated so heinously. And I think that, again, we could force the regime's outposts to be closed down. They have charities in the UK which operate as outposts of RSGC and the regime. That should be looked into. We should stop the negotiation with the JCPOA. We should support the people in Iran very publicly and maybe call for their diplomats to be sent back home because they have lost all legitimacy.
And I noticed when you were speaking there, Annalena Baerbock, who is from Germany, she's a foreign minister, Germany's foreign minister. She said that she would ensure the European Union froze assets and impose entry bans. She says that those who are beating up women and girls on the street are standing on the wrong side of history. They're expected to decide on sanctions, EU foreign ministers, on the 17th of October. Is this, I'm assuming you welcome these moves, but
Absolutely.
Is this enough, or do you think actually it's just talk at this point?
Well, until it's actually done, it is just talk. But I think that if, the EU, for example, and the UK and the US, have some kind of a cohesive movement here in terms of, public, admonition against the regime, rejecting the violence and actually acting upon it by calling the regime accountable, forcing them to answer to their crimes. And should they refuse, you could very simply tell them that they have to leave and actually engage with parties of the opposition so that, Iranians feel that they are being represented, that their cries are being heard. Millions of people stand to die brutally by the regime because they are shooting live bullets. Because the internet is down, it's very difficult, for us to get any live footage. But there was a massacre in Zahedan just a week ago where 67 people died, including children, and 300 were injured. The regime decided to shoot on, unarmed protesters. Those scenes should not be happening in the 21st century. We should not be negotiating with people who are condemning and actually allowing those violence to take place.
Well, Catherine Perez-Shakram, thank you for joining us. Do join us again, Research Fellow at the Henry Jackson Society. Now, since 2013, the number of disabled people in employment has increased by 1.5 million, but that still leaves almost half of all people with a disability out of work, and for many it's hard to find meaningful employment. Our North West of England reporter Sophie Reaper has been finding out more.
In the UK, 1 in 5 of the working age population are considered to be disabled. And yet many of these people struggle to find employment.
Do you like working with me?
2 times, yeah.
2, sometimes.
Meet the standout brothers. Ross has Down syndrome and has previously struggled to find work. That was until his brother, Christian, stepped in to help.
We started with free socks, didn't we?
Yeah, but hey guys.
Got 22 now, launched a company with free socks.
A lot. It's socks like different colours, black ladies here. Bad boys here.
What began as a way to get Ross out of the house during lockdown has now turned into meaningful employment for both brothers.
So Ross's big dream is to go to Tokyo, Japan, so hopefully the business will be able to make that happen. For myself, I'd love to help people that are in Ross's position. They're not just socks, for example. People see them and say, what are they about? And you can say...
Go make
they're a good make.
Yeah.
And you can tell people about our us, and you can tell people about what we're trying to do, and then hopefully further down the line we'll be able to start employing,
Yes.
which is the big dream in it.
All times.
However, for many in Ross's position, they don't have a brother like Christian to step in and help. Why is it so important to you, disability equality, to help people with disabilities to find employment?
I think it's really important that disabled people can, and know they can, live in the real world. So that's everything from education to employment to housing to socialising to leisure, etc. And it's really important because disabled people have a lot to offer.
But it's an ongoing battle. Mel has worked there for 25 years and she still says her work isn't done.
The problem we have got is tackling negative attitudes. So that's really difficult. So what we still see is lots of those negative attitudes, lots of the I don't think you can do that. So whilst the physical environment is changing, I think there's still a long way to go around attitudes.
But things are changing, and for the Standout brothers, they'll continue to put their best sock forward. Sophie Reaper, GB News.
Well, now on to the final story. Today is World Mental Health Day, and new research suggests that UK workplaces are not doing enough to support their employees' mental health. 1 in 4 employees admit, according to this research, that they've experienced suicidal thoughts at work, and over a fifth also said that they do not have anyone at work they feel comfortable talking to if they were struggling with their mental health. Well, suicide prevention charity Ripple is calling on legislators and workplaces to make suicide prevention mandatory and entrenched in their existing health and safety policies, on par with the likes of fire safety. Well, joining us now to talk about this in more detail is Alice Hendy, founder of Ripple. Thank you, Alice, for joining us. Really appreciate it. So, firstly, just talk to us about this charity, Ripple, and why you formed it.
Yep, so on the 25th of November 2020, I lost my brother Josh to suicide. He was 21 years old, my only sibling. And soon after his death, I found that he was looking at some really harmful material on the internet, not only to do with how to end his life, but even provided with tips, encouragement and so on as to how to do so. So I've made it my mission since my brother's passing to stop this happening to any other families, and I've created a piece of technology called Ripple. It's a charity and it intercepts any harmful online searches conducted by anyone else out there that might be struggling, and instead signposts them to get some mental health support.
And this is really interesting, because there's been a lot of conversation about internet safety. There's a bill currently going through. What do you make of that bill? Because it has been widely criticised for basically chipping away at our freedoms. People say, well, look, the internet, people should be allowed to post what they want. So where do we draw that balance between that and actually saying this is harmful material and could actually lead to suicide?
There's a very fine line. The online safety bill itself, firstly, it's taking far too long to actually be finalised and published. Secondly, it doesn't go far enough with regards to holding social media companies and websites to account. At the moment, it's only really focusing on the big tech giants. And we saw that in the Molly Rose Russell case just a couple of weeks ago within the coroner's investigation. What we're looking for is for the online bill to go further and actually hold all websites and all forums and activities to account for any harmful material that they post online, because it is daily contributing towards people ending their life as a result.
Have we seen an uptick, an increase in suicides recently? Because there was a point during the pandemic where people were saying, look, we should be expecting massive rises in suicides, because as we know, people were forced to be alone and their situations were exacerbated by lockdown. What are the figures on that at the moment?
So we haven't seen predominantly an increase because of COVID, but saying that, there is some serious underreporting going on with suicides. And unfortunately, it doesn't detract from the fact that although people might not be ending their life, they are still very much struggling with their mental health, not just at home in the aftermath of COVID, but actually we've seen from the figures that you shared earlier in the workplace as well. This is a real problem in the workplace. 1 in 4 people have had suicidal thoughts at work.
How do you broach that conversation? I mean, especially for friends and family, because it's one thing people in the workplace being trained by professionals on how to spot the signs and how to approach that. But what I find from people who have experienced this personally through friends and families is they don't know how to start that conversation because perhaps it's not even something they've ever talked about before.
Yeah, it's really tricky. I think the best advice we can give here is if you believe somebody is struggling with their mental health, please approach them about it. One of the biggest myths out there is that if you talk about the topic of suicide, you're putting the subject into their head and you're giving them ideas. That is not the case. Quite often, if somebody is having suicidal thoughts, by approaching them and asking them directly about it, they have huge relief. And it gives them that platform to then be able to share how they're feeling and open up. So I think approach them. Listen is probably the most important as well. Don't interrupt them. Don't judge them. Listen to them very carefully. If they repeat themselves over and over again about it, keep listening to them. It's really important that they feel heard. And from a workplace perspective, please download Ripple because this really is a silent intervention that might just be that trigger between somebody going down the route that my brother went down or actually getting that support.
So talk to us about the app. How exactly does it work? Because there will be lots of parents, especially after the Molly Russell case, who are desperate for some solution, some tech solution to stop this harmful content being viewed by their children.
Yeah, so Ripple is a piece of technology. It's a browser extension. It can be downloaded on Google Chrome, Microsoft Edge, Opera, Firefox browsers. And once downloaded onto desktops and computers, it means that if somebody was to then conduct an online search relating to the topic of self-harm or suicide, Ripple would intercept that search and instead provide that person with a message of hope, firstly, that things would get better, and signpost them to a whole range of different mental health resources that are out there that they can access both now and in the longer term. It's not just the Samaritans that exist, they do some great work, but it's also the likes of the text service provided by Shout, the web chat facility provided by Calm, apps you can download like the Hub of Hope. It gives people more of a choice of how they can get mental health support in a way that suits them.
And do these sorts of things not exist with the big... this seems like something that should already built into some of these apps and some of these web browsers anyway, and it's not? Is that the case?
I completely agree with you. Yeah. Ripple should be default on everybody's computers. I could go to my local phone shop now and purchase a new mobile phone and it will automatically come with Instagram on it.
Yeah.
Why do things like this not already come with this filtering to protect our young people and indeed adults from these harmful pieces of material that continuously are being posted?
Well, look, you're doing fantastic work. Ripple sounds incredible, and I'd obviously encourage people to look it up, see if it's the right thing for you. It sounds like you've been doing incredible work and saving lots of lives as well. Alice, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Alice Hendy there. She is the founder of that app, Ripple. Well, keep your thoughts coming into us. I am here for another hour and we'll be going to your views very shortly. GBViews at gbnews.uk. But first, here's a short break and the weather.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. It's a fine day for most of us, sunny skies for many, especially for England and Wales, but it will be windy for Scotland in particular, with quite frequent showers here. That's where an area of low pressure resides, just to the north of Scotland. Tight isobars there, bringing some strong winds, especially into the far north. But a cold front that has brought some rain earlier in the day, well, that's now clearing, and the last of the cloud clears away from Kent as we head into the afternoon as well. So brighter skies there for much of England and Wales. The odd shower for northwest England, perhaps North Wales as well. But the lion's share of showers will be across northern and western Scotland, a few for the north and Northern Ireland as well. Cloudier skies here and that brisk breeze making it feel cool. 11 to 13 Celsius for Scotland and Northern Ireland, but 14 to 17 for England and Wales, where we see those bright blue skies. Heading into the evening, and with light winds and clear skies for much of England, Wales, southern and eastern Scotland, well, we'll see temperatures fall away. The odd mist patch form, but for most it's a clear night. Cloudier conditions for the north and west of Scotland as well as Northern Ireland, and showers continuing here, although fewer compared with the daytime. So 7 or 8 Celsius in the northwest, whilst low single figures are possible across sheltered parts of England and Wales, even a touch of air frost in 1 or 2 spots. So cold start to the day for England, Wales, perhaps parts of eastern Scotland, but bright skies. Into the afternoon, I think the cloud will build for Scotland and for northern parts of Northern Ireland, with some outbreaks of rain arriving, 13 or 14 Celsius here, but we'll keep these sunny spells further south, 15 to 16 degrees, a degree or so cooler compared with Monday, but with light winds and those sunny skies, I think feeling pleasant enough. Into the evening, and the outbreaks of rain start to turn heavier and more persistent for Northern Ireland, Western Scotland, and that rain spreads across the country during Wednesday. A wet and windy day for many on Thursday, showers on Friday.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Online, and I am losing my voice a bit, so bear with me. I'll be talking Scottish nationalism, immigration, and the latest on Ukraine in this hour. Make sure you get in touch as well. Your views are always welcome. gbviews at gbnews.uk. We'll get to those throughout the programme. First, here's your latest headlines with Rosie.
Good morning, it's 11 o'clock. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date today on GB News. An urgent meeting of G7 leaders is going to be held tomorrow following the Russian airstrikes in Ukraine. Casualties are being reported across Ukraine following explosions in several cities, including the capital. The British Foreign Secretary James Cleverly says firing missiles in civilian areas is unacceptable. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says 11 important infrastructure facilities in Kyiv and 8 regions have been damaged.
They want panic and chaos. They want to destroy our energy system. They are hopeless. The second target is people. Such as time, such goals were specifically chosen to cause as much damage as possible. But we are Ukrainians. We help each other. We believe in ourselves. We restore everything that is destroyed.
The strikes come after President Vladimir Putin accused Ukraine of a targeted attack at the weekend, with a truck explosion damaging a bridge that links Russia to Crimea. Putin described the incident as an act of terror. Well, speaking at a rally in Arizona, the former US President Donald Trump warned World War III could happen unless measures are taken to end the conflict.
We must demand immediate negotiation of a peaceful end to the war in Ukraine, or we will end up in World War III, and there will never be a war like this. We will never have had a war like this, and that's all because of stupid people that don't have a clue, and it's also because of the kind of weaponry that's available today.
In some other news now, the Chancellor has bowed to pressure to bring forward his much-anticipated medium-term fiscal plan. Last week, in an exclusive interview with GB News, the Chancellor said he was going to stick to the original date in mid-November. Today, though, in a letter to the chairman of the Commons Treasury Committee, Kwasi Kwarteng said it will now be published on October the 31st. Well, the Liberal Democrats have accused the government of making a screeching U-turn, warning of a Halloween horror show unless there's a clear plan for the economy. The Prime Minister is going to urge MPs to work together as a united party as Parliament resumes this week. Liz Truss has now appointed Greg Hands as the International Trade Minister, a move that's been seen as an attempt to ease some Tory tension. Hands, who supported Rishi Sunak during the leadership contest, replaces Conor Burns, who was sacked from his role on Friday following a misconduct complaint. The Work and Pensions Minister, Victoria Prentice, told GB News the government's priority is getting new legislation through Parliament.
I think this is now a time for getting on with some really serious, detailed policy work and getting some legislation through Parliament. What's important to us, really, is that we provide that careful, sensible, calm government which the public need and deserve. I don't think people are interested in the interior workings of the Conservative Party.
Scotland's First Minister is expected to tell SNP delegates that independence will lead to a better relationship between the UK's four nations. Nicola Sturgeon, who's due to close the party conference in Aberdeen this afternoon, will also accuse the UK government of denying Scottish democracy. Well, we'll bring you that live when she gives it here on GB News today. Well, the Supreme Court are going to rule if a prospective bill to hold another vote on independence is within the powers of Holyrood later this week. Criminal barristers in England and Wales have voted to end their strike action after accepting a pay offer from the government. The offer from the Ministry of Justice includes reforms to set fees for legal aid work and also an investment of £54 million in the criminal bar. Almost 57% voted to accept the deal. Strike action will end at 6 tonight. The chair of the Criminal Bar Association, Kirsty Brimlow, told GB News there's still a lot of anger amongst the members.
The offer really did hit the demands of the criminal bar. However, a number of barristers still consider that it hasn't gone far enough. There's still a lot of trust in government that has to be realised, and we hope that this is the start of a constructive arrangement.
ScotRail is warning passengers of widespread travel disruption across its network today as strikes continue. It's members of the RMT who are staging a 24-hour walkout over an ongoing pay dispute. There will only be a limited number of ScotRail services that will operate today, and passengers are urged only to travel if they really need to. The number of people crossing the Channel in a single day has topped 1,000 for the fourth time in under 2 months. Ministry of Defence figures showed that 1,065 people made the journey from France to the UK yesterday in 25 small boats. The latest crossings bring the total number to over 34,700 people so far this year. You're up to date on GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's return to the Point.
Good morning. This is To The Point on GB News with me, Mercy Moroki, on your TV, radio and online. Here's what's coming up for this hour. Cabinet ministers have pleaded for the Conservative Party to show loyalty to the Prime Minister and to heal divisions. Liz Truss has appointed Greg Hands, a former Sunak backer, as Trade Minister, replacing Conor Burns, who was sacked from his post following a misconduct complaint. More on this in just a moment. And the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv, has been targeted by missile strikes for the first time in months, with explosions reported in other cities across the country. This comes as Mike Pompeo, former Secretary of State for America, has said that President Biden was reckless with his Armageddon comments when referencing the threat of nuclear war with Russia. More on that later. And what is the future of tech? As artificial intelligence technology advances, even down to our cashiers being machines, what does this mean for the older generation? Is this beneficial or actually a struggle? We'll be talking to an expert on this later. That's all coming up and much more as well across the next hour. And please get in touch with your views. The email is gbviews@gbnews.uk. Lots of views already, so do keep them coming in and I'll read as many as I can before midday. Now, Prime Minister Liz Truss has appointed Greg Hands as a minister in the Department for International Trade, replacing Conor Burns, who was sacked from his post following a misconduct complaint. Mr Hands had backed rival Rishi Sunak for Prime Minister, but his appointment is being seen as a way of healing divisions within the party. While Cabinet Ministers, including Suella Braverman and Penny Mordaunt, have pleaded for the Conservative Party to show loyalty to the Prime Minister. Well, let's quickly analyse this further with political reporter Catherine Forster here in the studio. Firstly, let's just discuss what's happened here with Conor Burns and Greg Hands. What are the details that we know on this?
So Conor Burns was sacked very abruptly on Friday as Trade Minister. The details are sketchy, but apparently there was a complaint made and allegedly he touched a young man's thigh. The complaint was not made by the person whose thigh he touched, we understand. He's very unhappy. He's saying he's going to clear his name. There's some feeling that perhaps the action was a little bit too far in that he didn't get the chance to be just suspended, he was sacked. But nevertheless, Liz Truss is clearly keen to have a zero-tolerance policy, and so are the whips, given what happened with Chris Pincher earlier in the summer. So she's now brought in Greg Hands, who it's notable really because he was a big supporter of former Chancellor and leadership rival Rishi Sunak. He had been a minister in the business department, and then Liz Truss had sent him back to the backbenches. Now she is bringing him back. So I think it's indicative of a softening of approach and a reaching out, a realisation that perhaps she appointed her own people. That's left a lot of Tory party MPs and big beasts with their noses out of joint. So we're going to see a real charm offensive this week to bring them back on board.
Yeah, is the charm offensive, you know, partly an indication that she perhaps doesn't have as much support as she anticipated. Now, of course, lots of people didn't vote for her. We already knew that. But the context under which all of this is happening, which isn't necessarily great for Liz Truss, does that mean she's kind of thinking, OK, I've made a bit of a mistake and I should probably be reaching out more?
I think they've realised that it hasn't been a good start. And at the Conservative conference, having to do the U-turn on the 45p tax rate and then also the benefits row, which is still ongoing, there's been a realisation that she and Kwasi Kwarteng have got to bring the parliamentary party with them and to try to get some unity. Otherwise, they simply won't be able to get these policies through. And of course, MPs are very, very worried about the position in the polls. So she is going to be meeting with groups of up to 30 Conservative MPs. She's going to be speaking to the 1922 Committee of Backbench MPs on Wednesday. She's going to be visible in the tea room. So there is a real effort, and I think Greg Hands is just, that appointment is just the first sign of a definite change and softening in approach.
And what should we read into what we've just learned about half an hour to an hour ago about Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng? He's brought forward his sort of medium-term fiscal event. Is it a fiscal event? Is that what we call it? To the 31st of October. Now, he had initially said it would be sometime in November, but he seems to have been forced to bring that forward by a couple of weeks.
I think exactly the same. I think a realisation that They need to calm the markets, they need to calm MPs, and there's been a lot of back and forth about this because he originally had said 23rd of November, then in his speech he said shortly, then he told Liam Halligan on GB News last week, no, it's still going to be the 23rd of November, but I think a realisation that the markets, things are very febrile at the moment, and there is a need to do this as quickly as possible to try to regain control and bring a sense of calm and order, if that's possible.
Yeah, and they've had to make a lot of changes in their short time governing the country, haven't they? Should we read that as the Conservative Party, you know, being flexible, or actually is it right that we should read that more cynically and say they're making a lot of mistakes?
Well, probably a bit of both. Clearly, they had these big plans. They wanted to go in all guns blazing. They wanted to be disruptors. But of course, the mandate that Liz Truss has is only from 80,000 Conservative members. The MPs, as we know, only a third of them voted for her in the final round. I think only 50 of them originally. So she is in a difficult place, and so is the Chancellor. So I think it's become clear to them that they cannot do everything that they would like to.
Well, Catherine, thank you so much for bringing us all those updates. Lots going on. It's hard to keep a track of it, but thank you. You've been very helpful on that front. Lots of you are not very happy with all this talk of U-turns for Liz Truss. Jackie says, why do you keep saying Liz Truss has made a U-turn? This is on the benefits policy, when she hasn't even laid out what her policy on the benefit increase is. I think this is interesting because it probably speaks to the fact there's a lot of briefing to the media on the part of, well, Conservative MPs, Conservative ministers in some case. So the policies are almost fed to the media before they even have become a thing. And that's why perhaps it looks like a U-turn, but it's not quite a U-turn because she hadn't even announced it. That is probably why. Dawn has a similar sentiment. All I and everyone else are getting every day from the media and newspaper is how bad Liz Truss and the Conservatives are. It now seems to be a constant theme. No human on the planet knows the answer to everything. We just do the best we can in the circumstances we live in. Really good point, Dawn. Some would say, well, actually, we should hold the Prime Minister to a higher standard. She should be on top of everything. And some would say she has inflicted pain unnecessarily to the country. But that's just one alternative. Thank you for your views, Dawn. Jackie, keep getting them in. gbviews@gbnews.uk. But joining me now is former Labour MP Stephen Pound to discuss this further. Well, lots to get stuck into, isn't it? It's definitely not a boring time for politics. I mean, firstly, let's start with Liz Truss. Do you think she has any chance of getting her party behind her and steadying the ship? She's on a charm offensive now, apparently.
Well, she's certainly been charming, but sadly she's always been quite offensive at the same time. That's the difficult thing. But you're right, it is a very target-rich environment at the present time. And I think your caller just now, who said basically cut Liz some slack, leave the poor woman alone, she's doing her best. Well, most of the really vicious briefing is coming from within the Tory party at the present time. And that's the really difficult thing. So, will she be gone by Christmas? No. I absolutely don't see that.
Yeah, that would be self-inflicted. And do you think, because Jackie did say, there's many U-turns, and they have had, let's be honest, they have had to roll back on a lot of their promises. I mean, just this morning we've seen Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng has been forced to reverse what he said only a couple of days ago and bring back this fiscal plan by a couple of weeks. Are these perhaps U-turns and changes, are they actually the Conservative Party showing that they can adapt? They are the party that adapts when they need to.
Nice line. Maynard Keynes said, when the facts change, I change my mind. What would you do? So there's a powerful case to be made for that. The real problem there, the thing is actually at the black heart of this particular Tory policy crisis at the moment, is that they never, ever costed it. They didn't have the Office of Budget Responsibility set up by Tory Chancellor George Osborne to actually actually run the slide rule over it. In other words, it was pie in the sky. They were just throwing these figures out. They were writing cheques, thinking that nobody would ever cash them. Now, that's the problem. It's not much a U-turn. It's actually a correction. I mean, they were just driving off the road, and they just tried to get back on the road at the present time. But, you know, as people say, if you do 2 U-turns, you end up facing the direction you started with.
Yeah, well, on that, somebody who's definitely not U-turning is Nicola Sturgeon. She's very intent, isn't she, on having this Scottish referendum. She says she believes she should and can have it, despite the fact the Supreme Court does need to look at whether they can sort of unilaterally hold one. Where do you think we're going to end up on all of that? Because she did say it was once in a generation, didn't she?
Well, Alex Salmond said that, but don't forget, you know, she was Alex Salmond's, you know, sort of number 2, following sort of the fish continuity there. But the reality is there's not going to be a second referendum. So what she's doing is she's what she once described as the unionist trap. She's going to make the next election a moratorium or a de facto referendum. Now, the problem is she could well lose that. I mean, she's just annoyed 600,000 Conservative voters.
But could she lose that? I mean, look, she's got 60-something odd seats. The rest are on 30 odd. Like, you know, she's got a big majority.
Yeah. Yeah, well, equally, the Conservatives are winning seats back where they didn't before. Labour is doing far, far better than under Anna Sarwar. So, I mean, you know, the politics is very febrile at the present time. You know, there's no more certainties anymore. And at the present time, on the current polls, you know, Labour wins seats in Scotland. So I think the problem is, and, you know, I know you're probably going to mention Angela Rayner here, so let's not go there, but I don't think you should say things about your opponents in that way. And what's interesting is that her number 2, no, in fact, Ian Blackford, who is the leader of the SNP in Parliament in Westminster, he said, you know, you oppose your enemies, you don't insult them. So I think there's a split within the SNP. The problem with Nicola is if you're a one-trick pony, if it's just independence, our oil, independence, and you're not going to get it, where do you go? They're making a mess of education. They've got the worst drugs crisis anywhere in Northern Europe. They've got this ferry insanity where they're just throwing money into the sea and there's no ferries for it. And what else has she got to go for? It's, you know, at the end of the day, she's rose back and it's Braveheart, paint your face, blue stripes, and you can vote for independence.
Not a fan of Nicola Sturgeon, then.
I think she's a great politician, actually. She would have made a marvellous Labour minister.
She is. I'm sure many books will be written about her. Look, thank you so much. Always great to get your view there, Stephen Pound. Thanks for coming into the studio for that. Well, lots of you have been getting in touch about Nicola Sturgeon, so I will be going to those views very shortly. But after the break, the Ukrainian capital Kiev has been targeted by missile strikes for the first time in months, with explosions reported in other cities across the country. And Mike Pompeo, former US Secretary of State, has said that President Biden was reckless with his Armageddon comments when referencing the threat of nuclear war with Russia. I'll explain all of that after the break, and here's your weather.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. It's a fine day for most of us, sunny skies for many, especially for England and Wales, but it will be windy for Scotland in particular, with quite frequent showers here. That's where an area of low pressure resides, just to the north of Scotland. Tight isobars there, bringing some strong winds, especially into the far north. But a cold front that has brought some rain earlier in the day, well, that's now clearing, and the last of the cloud clears away from Kent as we head into the afternoon as well. So brighter skies there for much of England and Wales. The odd shower for northwest England, perhaps North Wales as well. But the lion's share of showers will be across northern and western Scotland, a few for the north and Northern Ireland as well. Cloudier skies here, and that brisk breeze making it feel cool. 11 to 13 Celsius for Scotland and Northern Ireland, but 14 to 17 for England and Wales, where we see those bright blue skies. Heading into the evening, and with light winds and clear skies for much of England, Wales, southern and eastern Scotland, well, we'll see temperatures fall away. The odd mist patch form, but for most it's a clear night. Cloudier conditions for the north and west of Scotland as well as Northern Ireland, and showers continuing here, although fewer compared with the daytime. So 7 or 8 Celsius in the northwest, whilst low single figures are possible across sheltered parts of England and Wales, even a touch of air frost in 1 or 2 spots. So cold start to the day for England, Wales, perhaps parts of eastern Scotland, but bright skies. Into the afternoon, I think the cloud will build for Scotland and for northern parts of Northern Ireland, with some outbreaks of rain arriving, 13 or 14 Celsius here, but we keep these sunny spells further south, 15 to 16 degrees, a degree or so cooler compared with Monday, but with light winds and those sunny skies, I think feeling pleasant enough. Into the evening, and the outbreaks of rain start to turn heavier and more persistent for Northern Ireland, Western Scotland, and that rain spreads across the country during Wednesday. A wet and windy day for many on Thursday, showers on Friday.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good morning, it's 11:23 and this is To The Point with Mercy Muroki on GB News. We're live on your TV, online and radio this morning. Now, the Ukrainian capital Kyiv has been targeted by missile strikes for the first time in months, with explosions reported in other cities across the country, including Lviv, Dnipro and Zaporizhia. This comes after Russian President Vladimir Putin accused Ukraine of attacking the bridge to Russian-annexed Crimea, saying that it was an act of terrorism. Meanwhile, former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has said that President Joe Biden was reckless for putting the American people at risk. With these comments, he said, "We have not faced the prospect of Armageddon since Kennedy and the Cuban Missile Crisis." Biden was referencing the October 1962 crisis that put the United States and the Soviet Union on the verge of nuclear war for almost 2 weeks. Well, former British Army Colonel and chemical weapons expert Hamish de Bretton Gordon joins me to discuss all of this. Good morning. Lots of angles, really, to this. Lots has been happening. Let's begin with those explosions that rocked Kyiv overnight. There have been months of relative calm in the city. What do you put this down to? Give us some analysis on those explosions.
Good morning, Mercy. I think it's really a revelation that Putin is now looking towards what we call unconventional warfare. This is a type of warfare that the Russians and Syrians perfected in Syria, and it focuses very much on attacking civilians. We have seen militarily the Russian army has been defeated at every turn by the Ukrainians, and their conventional warfare as such has failed. The attack on the bridge in Crimea over the weekend is another stark issue for Russia and Putin, that the Ukrainian military can attack them almost anywhere they want to in order to be successful. So I think what we've seen at the moment, these, I think, 85 missiles already attacking Kiev today, is this unconventional warfare. And in that, the Russians intend to attack civilians rather than the military. And what they found in Syria is if they attack civilians, attacking schools and hospitals and infrastructure, exactly what they're doing now in Ukraine, they would hope that the civilians would capitulate. But I think morale and momentum is with the Ukrainian people, and it's certainly not with the Russians. And it's horrific to watch the scenes that we're seeing at the moment. But this is, I think, where the war is going. And on the sort of nuclear, chemical and biological side, Russia and Putin has threatened to use all the weapons available to stave off defeat. And this is where now I think we need to really focus hard in the West and NATO on what we can do to try and restrict those civilian casualties to the absolute minimum and try and hold the Russians and come up with a plan to turn this around.
On that, Russia has, of course, threatened to use all the weapons in their arsenal, really, to if they need to. And lots of people have said, look, you can't take Vladimir Putin at his word. Let's not get carried away. Let's focus on what is in front of us. However, the American President Biden has said we've not faced the prospect of Armageddon since Kennedy and the Cuban Missile Crisis. Now, he has been rebuked for these comments by Mike Pompeo. What do you make of his comments? Because don't comments like this sort of inflame tensions in the situation, or actually has he got a point?
I think he's got a point, Mercy. There's always a very challenging area when you're talking about chemical, biological and nuclear weapons between terrifying the population and reassuring them. Now, we know that the nuclear piece is absolutely on the table because Putin has been threatening it for some time. So I think we need to take it very seriously. However, I do not agree that we are close to Armageddon. I don't see a strategic nuclear war happening here. I think there are too many checks and balances, both in the Kremlin and in Washington and in London, to prevent this happening at a whim. And the way that Putin is acting irrationally at the moment, and an irrational leader with nuclear weapons, is very dangerous. But I don't think he can just press that red button. I think there is an issue with what we call the tactical nuclear weapons. There are rather smaller ones, which is a bizarre way of describing. They're still massive. But I think that NATO could prevent those being used if it wanted to. And also, we've seen the attack on infrastructure only today, but even recently on the nuclear power stations in Ukraine, particularly Zaporizhzhia, and that well could be a focus. So I think I don't see us at Armageddon, but I do see the potential for the use of chemical, biological and nuclear weapons. And I think it's very much up to NATO to come up with a plan that will make that less likely. And I think we need to pay Putin at his own game. And by doing that, I think we need to threaten, probably firstly, bringing Ukraine into NATO more rapidly if the attacks on civilians and the nuclear threat doesn't go away. And we should probably also think about no-fly zones over critical infrastructure like the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power station, and also, where we can, over hospitals and schools and other civilian networks. I know that the Americans are providing some very effective air defence systems, so it won't be there until November. But we should think on how we can protect these civilians, innocent civilians, from direct attack by the Russians, because what they're doing is a war crime and illegal against the Geneva Convention and every other convention. And I think it's behest of us to try and protect those Ukrainian civilians as much as we can.
Coming on the programme today, always great to have your view. He's a former British Army colonel and chemical weapons expert. Now let's go to a couple of your views before we give you the headlines. Andrew says, I honestly believe the Tories want to lose the next general election. If I did so many U-turns, I would expect to fail my driving test. And it's the same with elections. That's an interesting analogy there, Andrew. I did fail my driving test 8 times. So, yeah, I definitely have experience with failing my driving test. Let's get Catherine's views. Sturgeon and the SNP should be removed from Holyrood. No excuses for their behaviour. They are destroying Scotland and the United Kingdom. Shameful. That's a legitimate view, but then again, they do keep winning those elections, don't they? They've got double the number of seats of their opponents, their key opponents, Labour and the Conservatives, in the Scottish Parliament. So the only way to get them out is for them to lose a general an election in the Scottish Parliament. Jacqueline says, as an English person, I'm tired of the SNP party soaking up English subsidies whilst biting the hand that allows them to live beyond the tax income raised. Cancel the Barnett formula and see if she can sell it to the Scots that they will be a lot poorer. Again, interesting view, because when you look at polls and ask people, do you think Scotland will be better off or worse off if they were independent? A majority, or around 50%, think that Scotland would be worse off. A majority of people in the whole of the United Kingdom. So, you know, there are lots of people who don't think leaving is a good economic strategy, but clearly not to Nicholas Sturgeon. So there you go. Keep your views coming in. gbviews@gbnews.uk. But after the break is the rise in immigration due to people falsely trying to register as trafficking victims who are gaming the system, because that's what our new Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, has suggested. Well, head of Britain's Labour abuse watchdog, Gang Masters, and a Labour abuse authority disagree. And I'll be discussing this with social policy analyst Rakib Ehsan after this morning's headlines.
A very good morning, 11:32. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. An urgent meeting of G7 leaders is going to be held tomorrow following the Russian airstrikes in Ukraine. Casualties are being reported across the country following explosions in several cities, including the capital. The British Foreign Secretary James Cleverly says firing missiles in civilian areas is unacceptable. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says 11 important infrastructure facilities in Kyiv and 8 regions have been damaged. The Chancellor's bowed to pressure to bring forward his much-anticipated medium-term fiscal plan. Last week, in an exclusive interview with GB News, Kwasi Kwarteng said he was going to stick to the original date in mid-November. Well, today, in a letter to the chairman of the Commons Treasury Committee, he says it will now be published on October the 31st. Scotland's First Minister is expected to tell SNP delegates today that independence will lead to a better relationship between the UK's 4 nations. Nicola Sturgeon, who's due to close the party conference in Aberdeen this afternoon, will also accuse the UK government of denying Scottish democracy. We'll bring you that speech live here on GB News. The King has sent a message of condolence to the President of Ireland following the death of 10 people in Friday's petrol station explosion in County Donegal. He said both he and the Queen Consort have been filled with immense sadness. They offered their heartfelt sympathy to those affected in what he described as a devastating tragedy. Criminal barristers in England and Wales have voted to end strike action after accepting a pay offer from the government. It includes reforms to set fees for legal aid work and an investment of £54 million in the criminal bar. Almost 57% voted to accept the deal. Strike action will end at 6 o'clock tonight. We're on your TV, online and your DAB+ radio. It's GB News. Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets then. The pound will buy you $1.1072 and €1.1407. The price of gold is £1,516.99 per ounce, and the FTSE 100 is at 6,969 points.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christie's. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Good morning, it's 11:37 and this is To The Point with me, Mercy Muroki, on GB News. I'm live on your TV, online and radio. Now, Home Secretary Suella Braverman said people falsely trying to register as trafficking victims were gaming the system and, quote, derailing the UK's policy on illegal immigration. But now the head of Britain's labour abuse watchdog says the organisation has not seen anyone gaming the modern slavery system for immigration purposes, while the chief executive of the organisation, Alicia McCaffrey, went on to say this: "We don't see people gaming the system. That's not our experience. What we see is vulnerable people who are being exploited by opportunists and criminals." Well, joining us now to discuss this is Dr. Rakib Ehsan, a social policy analyst. Hi, Rakib. Great to talk to you again. Is this a red herring, what Suella Braverman has pointed out, this idea that people are coming to this country illegally and essentially saying they're victims of human trafficking as a means of gaming the system?
Well, Mercy, I think that we need to adopt a more nuanced approach to these kind of issues, and that includes illegal immigration. There are sections within illegal trends of inward migration, you could say, which do involve people trafficking. We've talked a great deal in recent times about people smuggling infrastructures which have taken root in the UK, and that how that ties in with very serious forms of labour exploitation. I do think that the Conservatives in recent history have somewhat been complacent when it comes to those forms of labour exploitation which do involve illegal migrants. What I would like to see, Mercy, are our law enforcement agencies being better equipped and better resourced when it comes to clamping down on those people smuggling infrastructures, and also businesses that unfortunately adopt practices which are anything but pro-worker.
Yeah, and look, it's not... Suella Braverman, she is right to some extent, because apparently there's been a 450% increase in modern slavery claims since 2014. But isn't that just because we have more robust modern slavery laws, that means of reporting modern slavery when people see them are easier than they previously were? So is she misreading this as an indication that people are gaming the system?
Well, I think that when we're talking about, I think undoubtedly, and this is something that I've written about a great deal in recent times, Mercy, is that there are ways that our current asylum system is dysfunctional and is being exploited. I don't think that we should draw attention away from that. However, we have in recent times introduced new legislation when it comes to modern slavery. So, of course, there is that possibility that as a result of that new legislation which has been introduced, people are more aware of what constitutes modern slavery. And I do think that this is actually an opportunity for the Conservatives to blend a compassionate conservatism with robust law and order. We do need to stamp out forms of modern slavery which do exist in Britain. In recent times, there's been scandals such as the sweatshops in Leicester. So I think that we really need to clamp down on those forms of labour exploitation, and we have to ultimately challenge businesses who are only too happy to recruit people on incredibly low wages and ultimately enhance their profits by doing that.
Yeah, and there's another story relating to asylum seeking that seemed to have slipped evaded me, but the Home Office has been forced to admit that the Albanian asylum seekers will not be fast-tracked for deportation. This is something that's said before, but they've said if Albanian asylum seekers come here, they cross the channel illegally, but then they claim asylum, then actually we have no basis to fast-track their deportation. They will be treated as regular asylum seekers like all the other asylum seekers. Is this an issue, or could this be expected? Because they told us, didn't they, the Home Office, that they would have a quick scheme to make sure people from Albania who are claiming to be asylum seekers would be sent back to Albania.
Well, there was an understanding that there was some kind of rapid returns deal in place with the Albanian government. So there's a great deal of confusion here from the UK government in terms of what it is able to do in terms of deportations. I have questioned the UK government's approach in terms of trying to adopt a consistent policy, because at the moment there's a great deal of what appears to be chopping and changing. The recent Home Office statistics do show that in recent times the majority of those illegally crossing the channel to enter the UK do originate from Albania. Albania hasn't experienced conflict since 1997, the Civil War. So I think there are questions to be asked in terms of to what extent are people who are claiming asylum fleeing genuine persecution and violence in their homelands. But then obviously going back to the issue of trafficking, I would like to see an asylum system, Mercy, which ultimately prioritises women and girls who are at serious risk of sexual violence and political persecution in their countries of origin.
And very finally, I have been away for a week, so I haven't had a chance to engage with many people on this, but I think it is really important, and you're probably the perfect person to discuss this with. We saw Suella Braverman, didn't we, getting in trouble because she said her dream is to send asylum seekers on a plane to Rwanda, and she was criticised because, you know, apparently you're not meant to have these strong anti-immigration views if you're also an ethnic minority. What do you make of all of that? Because, you know, I've been criticised for having views in the past that are not considered views an ethnic minority should have. But should you have pro-immigration views, strong pro-immigration views, just because you're an ethnic minority?
Well, I'd actually say that would be a case of failed integration if you supported a form of open borders, cosmopolitanism, you could say, on the grounds of being of migrant stock yourself. I wouldn't consider that to be a very successful form of immigration. Now, leaving aside what the Home Secretary likes to dream about, I would actually say that if you are of migrant stock, but you're well integrated and you're concerned by the potential economic and social impacts of poorly managed immigration, I would actually say that's a successful form of social integration because it demonstrates a degree of protectiveness when it comes to your home country. I think that we really need to move away from that toxic racial identity politics. Of course, people are absolutely entitled to criticise the UK-Rwanda asylum partnership on moral and ethical grounds, but stick to the bread and butter politics and policy and don't be so obsessed over the racial identity of your political opponents.
Good idea there. I would tend to agree with you, Dr. Rakib Ehsan. Thank you so much for joining me this morning, social policy analyst there and friend of the channel. Now, for our final story, is artificial intelligence changing the way we go about our everyday life? Well, I think the answer to that is yes. But are we in a society where we should all become AI dependent? Because let's take self-scan tills in a supermarket as an example, supposedly more efficient with the least amount of human interaction possible. But as society advances technologically, are we forgetting about the older generation? Most older people do prefer a human cashier, for example, as for some, it's the only interaction they get. Well, let's speak about this with technology and finance correspondent from sharecast.com, Josh White. This is a really interesting conversation. Thank you for joining me. This is an interesting conversation because we've all been told that moving to AI and automating everything is the future, and there's almost no discussion around whether that should be the case. But we don't talk about whether that's actually preferable for everyone, including old people.
Well, exactly. I mean, it's interesting that the conversation is around self-scan checkouts, which we've had for, well, at least 10 years now in most shops. And they're sort of moving out of the way now. Supermarkets are trialing completely checkout-free stores, which is a whole another step of not having this interaction, which I think even for those of us who perhaps do prefer a self-checkout, that's a completely new frontier, I suppose, perhaps a little bit frightening.
But there's also the question, isn't there, of the fact that sometimes these technologies for older people are just completely alien, and it's not the fact that they don't understand them because they're not very clever. Of course, it's not. It's actually just it's completely alien technology. I showed my daughter the other day my first phone, which was a Nokia, and she didn't understand why it looked like it did. It was completely confusing to her why I had this phone that was alien to her. It's that same thing. Do we not appreciate how completely alien things like AI and all these new technologies are to the older generation?
Well, I think that is a risk that we're perhaps staring down as a society, is that this big push to automate things, to make things more efficient, to make things supposedly easier for the customer, perhaps easier for the company more so, but we're forgetting about the fact that some people, especially older people, prefer that human interaction. That's how it always has been, not just on a technology basis, but on the basis of this might be they're going out for the day. They just want to have a chat with someone. It's how it's always been at the shops. I like what you say about your daughter with your first phone. I was reading something recently that was that the phone icon on a phone, and of course the save icon on word processing, which is a floppy disk, are completely foreign to the younger generation. They don't know what those icons mean. So there's such a generational difference happening here, and we're at risk of, as you say, alienating so many people if that choice isn't there.
But there is the other side, to play devil's advocate, I suppose, where technology can help with things like loneliness. You know, you have devices that, for instance, you can have video calls with older people straight into their living room, and they have cameras now which kind of show your entire room, so that your family in another house feels like they're almost in there with you. So it's not all bad, is it?
No, of course not. I mean, as we've seen with the pandemic, I was, beginning of the pandemic, I was living alone, like many people. Most of my family's 12,000 miles away in New Zealand, and without that kind of technology for so many of us, it would have been quite a much more difficult time than it was. So, no, it's not all doom and gloom, but I do think that what we need to keep in mind, especially when it comes to things like retail, is that having that human touch is so important to so many people, just to feel comfortable when they're out and about.
And very finally, just out of interest, what was your first phone?
Ooh, it was a Motorola something, black and white screen, very small. The battery would last a week, and I think it had one game on it.
Yeah, was that? I had a Nokia 3510 and Snake was just the best thing ever. And I kind of do want one again as a form of nostalgia because I'm not sure I quite like where technology's going, but it's always a nice trip down memory lane talking to people about old phones because they have changed so massively.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, look, it's been great to speak with you this morning, Josh White there, who is a technology and finance correspondent with sharecast.com. Now, Castle Espy in County Down are having their Brent weekend, which celebrates the annual arrival of the Canadian Brent geese. These birds travelled 3,000 miles from Arctic Canada to spend the winter in Strangford Lough. Dougie Beattie has gone along to find out more, and I hope I said that right. Maybe Dougie can tell me.
Strangford Lough is a summer destination for leisure activities, but just as we are starting to feel the cold, new holiday makers arrive.
These birds fly down from the Canadian high Arctic every year to this part of Strangford Lough, travelling over 3,000 miles, and it's the eelgrass here that attracts them, and it's one of the most amazing wildlife spectacles in Europe, and here it is in Northern Ireland.
Paul Stewart is the manager in Castle Espy Wetland Centre and monitors the Brent geese that holiday here.
Normally you think of birds migrating, you think of them leaving and going south to warmer climes. And that's what's happening with the Brent geese. They're leaving in Canada and they're coming down here, so we think our winters are cold and horrible. Actually, and compared to northern Canada, the climate here is quite mild. So migration can work both ways.
Strangford's rhythm of life is a finely balanced one. As the swallows go south, the mackerel comes in and the geese touch down. The shoreline here is riddled by the scars of an industrial past, but nature's ability to fill the void has encouraged man to look after its wildlife.
So it's amazing to think that this habitat here actually used to be the site of a lot of heavy industry. There was quarrying here, there were brickworks, and there were schooners used to come in and take the bricks away, and there were lime kilns here for creating lime. So it was a very, there was a lot of heavy industry going on here, not the sort of thing you'd associate with wildlife. But then when the brickworks closed in the latter half of the 19th century, nature subsumed all these old quarries. And now what was an industrial site is now a wildlife bonanza, really. The mosaic of wetland habitats here is really quite exceptional.
An estimated 25,000 birds have now arrived and will stay to the early new year. They will then begin the whole circle once more. Dougie Beattie, GB News.
Gosh, 3,000 miles, that's quite incredible. Let's end the show with some of your views, a few minutes left. This is an interesting one. Lots of you have been getting in touch to ask why are comms so bad in Downing Street? Because they've picked Downing Street, they've picked Halloween, Downing Street have, for the Chancellor's statement. It's on the 31st of October. They have moved it a couple of weeks. Headline writers are already printing their pumpkin/nightmare jokes. This is what Helen says. The government live in an unintelligent bubble surrounded by kid spads. Yes, so I'm sure headline writers at newspaper editors will have a field day with that one. Gary says the only reason Nicola Sturgeon remains in power is because the unionist vote is split 3 ways. Sturgeon is not Scotland. Very, very true. She doesn't have an outright majority in terms of seats. Let's see. Duncan says the argument, this is in relation to immigration and lots of the people coming across the channel being from Albania, which is not a war-torn country. Duncan says the argument that they are escaping a war-torn country doesn't hold, as they're coming from France. Why is it they want to risk the journey across the channel? What is it here that makes that all worthwhile? Well, it's interesting, actually, because I think most people living here would say the country's falling apart. Public services don't work when you need them to, and the quality of life isn't great. So maybe they are being missold Britain, to be honest, which is why they're risking their lives. But that is it from me here on To The Point. I will be back tomorrow, but don't go away, because up next is GB News Day with Mark Longhurst and Gloria De Piero, as usually. But here's the weather.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. It's a fine day for most of us, sunny skies for many, especially for England and Wales, but it will be windy for Scotland in particular, with quite frequent showers here. That's where an area of low pressure resides, just to the north of Scotland. Tight isobars there, bringing some strong winds, especially into the far north. But a cold front that has brought some rain earlier in the day, well, that's now clearing, and the last of the cloud clears away from Kent as we head into the afternoon as well. So brighter skies there for much of England and Wales. The odd shower for northwest England, perhaps North Wales as well. But the lion's share of showers will be across northern and western Scotland, a few for the north and Northern Ireland as well. Cloudier skies here, and that brisk breeze making it feel cool. 11 to 13 Celsius for Scotland and Northern Ireland, but 14 to 17 for England and Wales, where we see those bright blue skies. Heading into the evening, and with light winds and clear skies for much of England, Wales, southern and eastern Scotland, well, we'll see temperatures fall away. The odd mist patch form, but for most it's a clear night. Cloudier conditions for the north and west of Scotland as well as Northern Ireland, and showers continuing here, although fewer compared with the daytime. So 7 or 8 Celsius in the northwest, whilst low single figures are possible across sheltered parts of England and Wales, even a touch of air frost in 1 or 2 spots. So cold start to the day for England, Wales, perhaps parts of eastern Scotland, but bright skies. Into the afternoon, I think the cloud will build for Scotland and for northern parts of Northern Ireland, with some outbreaks of rain arriving, 13 or 14 Celsius here, but we keep these sunny spells further south, 15 to 16 degrees, a degree or so cooler compared with Monday, but with light winds and those sunny skies, I think feeling pleasant enough. Into the evening, and the outbreaks of rain start to turn heavier and more persistent for Northern Ireland, Western Scotland, and that rain spreads across the country during Wednesday. A wet and windy day for many on Thursday, showers on Friday.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christie's. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go.